Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this press conference by the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Volkan Bozkir. The President will first make some brief opening remarks, and then we will take your questions. Over to you, please, Mr. President.
Thank you. So I can take
Yes.
Distinguished members of the press, good morning. Before starting, I would like to wish you a very happy new year. I hope 2021 will be much better than 2020. I wish you good health, prosperity, and happiness during the year. It's good to see you all, as I mark a personal milestone as well. Today is exactly 4 months since my first day in office, and 5 months since my arrival in New York. So, in a way, I wanted to meet you to share with you how I look at the 4 months in office, and would like to share with you what is waiting for us during the second part of my tenure. I think I have been immensely proud of and delighted by what the General Assembly has been able to accomplish thus far. And with thanks to our member states, we have shown that the United Nations is back from the horrible several months where the United Nations couldn't meet, couldn't have meetings, and in a way, from the world's perspective, UN was looked as if it was not efficient as it should have been. But taking advantage of this conference and with you, which are the ears and eyes of the international public opinion, I would like to thank to all member states for their full and comprehensive endorsement of the rules-based international order and principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter during the opening segment of the 75th session. Of course, we have faced a lot of difficult circumstances this session. Because of the COVID-19, we have encountered daunting operational challenges. But through it all, I have pushed for and have been happy to see the General Assembly's important activities continue throughout the main part of the session. The Assembly, in that respect, showed that even under most trying of circumstances, it can deliver on behalf of the people it serves. And this is a testament to member states' enduring commitment to the United Nations, which they voiced so clearly last September. You know that from the first day, even during my election process, I have advocated for a return to the General Assembly's normal way of working. And we have succeeded in the sense that Assembly has been meeting regularly and taking action on decisions and resolutions in person. So far, during the main part of the session, the General Assembly convened 80 times, including formal and informal plenaries, and adopted 257 resolutions and 67 decisions. Main committees, which are the pillar of the General Assembly work in a way, concluded their work, ably adapting to the COVID-related circumstances through hybrid working methods, combining virtual and in-person meetings. And the Assembly considered all the reports submitted by its main committees. The other principal organs of the UN, namely ECOSOC, and the International Court of Justice and the Human Rights Council and other courts and tribunals. So the elections for the Human Rights Council and International Court of Justice were successfully held in person as well, the latter, of course, in parallel with the Security Council. We started the 75th session with the high-level fortnight in late September. That was also in very exceptional circumstances. And for the first time in the history of this organization, global leaders were not able to be in the General Assembly Hall in person. But I'm pleased to recall that this did not prevent multilateralism from operating at the highest levels. Heads of states, ministers, heads of governments laid down a complete guidance on steps needed to overcome the challenges we face. And the fact that record number of world leaders chose to address the Assembly this session was a testament of the power and relevance of the United Nations. Indeed, I think no other body has yet the potential to address global challenges like that. The very first resolution that the General Assembly adopted this session was the Declaration on the Commemoration of the 75th Anniversary of the United Nations. With that landmark document, which we will refer to in many other occasions during this year or the coming sessions, member states expressed their strong commitment to work together to strengthen coordination and global governance for the common future of present and coming generations. The preamble of the United Nations Charter was signed by all member states, observer states, EU, Secretary General, and me on the occasion of the UN Day. And it is now displayed at the entrance of the General Assembly Hall as another solid symbol of this commitment. With the first ever Biodiversity Summit on the 30th of September, we set the stage for a global movement for urgent action on biodiversity for sustainable development. Summit was a very important step in building political momentum towards the post-2020 global biodiversity framework to be adopted at COP15 in Kunming, China. You know that one of my personal favorites was among the high-level fortnight events, the high-level meeting to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference of Women. And this meeting showed that we have a long way to go, while it also displayed our commitment to accelerate the realization of gender equality. I will continue to focus towards that goal during my term in office. Meanwhile, the General Assembly clearly committed to nuclear disarmament from its inception. And in fact, the very first resolution passed in 1946 aimed to achieve global nuclear disarmament. In that context, I was happy to preside over the UN high-level meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons last October. In terms of other notable achievements, the General Assembly, successfully held its 31st special session on today's most important global issue, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. For the first time, we tried a new format there because of the inconvenience to have participants being present in the UN General Assembly Hall. For 12 hours, we were connected online with people across the globe, and they were seen in the General Assembly Hall on the screens. So they were with us, we were with them. And I think this is technically and business way one of a great success for the United Nations General Assembly. We brought together member states, a diverse group of UN leaders, top scientists, civil society, and others to share information and strategize about how to beat the pandemic and address its devastating effects as a united international community. And we will use this format in other meetings if this situation continues, so that we can have those groups with us in the General Assembly Hall, online, and as the world through the UN Web TV watching what's going on here. I think these discussions will continue to dominate the remainder of this session. most probably we will have to end up the 75th session with what we have in hand now. It doesn't look like we will have the luxury or privilege or to be happy with what we had last year. The reality is that we will most probably continue with this format until the end of the 75th session, if something surprising the end comes out. So the Assembly has been holding all summits and high-level meetings mandated for this session. This is very important. We did not postpone or cancel any meeting. And that's why I'm calling this a success of the member states and the United Nations and the United Nations General Assembly. There have been some tough moments as well. For example, the budget discussions. It had traditionally, normally, the budget discussions wraps up before Christmas. But this year, for the first time in history, the General Assembly did not adopt the UN's regular budget until the very last day of the year. But when I saw that the negotiations weren't progressing fast enough, I expressed my concern in a written format and explained how severely the UN would have to curtail its work if we didn't have a favorable outcome. I was pleased to see that my message helped the delegates who were working at some point almost 24 hours a day to move us forward, and just in time. Given the adverse working conditions due to the lack of in-person negotiations, I consider that result, even at the last moment, to be an important success for multilateralism and our organization. Throughout it all, we have been following mitigation measures and have been happy to see that there have been no known COVID-19 transmissions in the General Assembly Hall or anywhere at the UN headquarters. And I think the UN General Assembly has been an example to all other international fora. And they are asking us how we are handling the General Assembly work here, so that they can also apply it in parliaments or large gatherings in Europe or other parts of the world as well. So we're proud that we found a way, respecting the mitigation measures and having the General Assembly working in person for 4 months now. But to be safe and to ensure business continuity in all circumstances, last November, the Assembly agreed on an important procedure to take decisions, and that is in case where in-person meetings are not possible, we now have the possibility of e-voting, which is, I think, an important milestone. If something happens again, we will not have the United Nations General Assembly only depend on the silent procedure, but also have e-voting to solve problems and to pass resolutions which has to be registered. Distinguished members of the press, dear friends, regarding my personal initiatives, I have pinned them to my priorities. Obviously, the COVID-19 is currently the biggest challenge, but we face also the deepest global recession since the Great Depression and the broadest collapse in incomes since 1870. So the pandemic has created a socio-economic crisis as well. It hijacked our development trajectory and hit vulnerable countries especially very hard. And that includes countries crippled by debt, dependent on dwindling tourism, and suffering the loss of foreign investments, export earnings, and many other, among others. So in that regard, I created a board of advisors on least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states to ensure that the views and concerns of these most vulnerable countries are reflected through this session. This is under my responsibility, and the meetings are going very well. I have chosen very qualified, well-known people to be members of this board, and we will continue to stand up with countries in need and keep member states informed of my efforts and also the board's efforts. I should also at this point note our collaboration with the distinguished president of the ECOSOC, Ambassador Münir Akram. ECOSOC is a very important body in the UN system. And through our monthly meetings and other joint endeavors, we seek to coordinate our activities as president of the PGA and the president of the ECOSOC. And so that we can support sustainable development with a special focus on the developing world. Secondly, I'm sure you're aware that gender equality and empowerment of women is a priority area of me from the beginning and also for my presidency. Thus, meanwhile, women and girls have been particularly hurt by COVID-19, including through job losses and increased domestic abuse during lockdowns. That was instrumental in my decision to establish a gender advisory board to help me better incorporate gender equality and women's empowerment into the General Assembly's work. The aim is improving the lives of women and girls around the globe. And I was proud to be named as an international gender champion. I have shared the outcomes of the initial work of these two advisory board meetings, and with the member states, also with you and with everybody who is interested. And I will continue to provide updates as we progress during the session. Thirdly, I also continued the tradition of morning dialogues to encourage member states to discuss openly and frankly the most topical issues of our time. So far, I had 4 morning dialogues, and I will have the 5th one next week, on LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS, the first meeting, biodiversity, the 2nd morning dialogue, digital cooperation and connectivity as the 3rd, and reform and revitalization of the UN General Assembly as the 4th. So the 5th one will be on energy. Not to my surprise, I find those informal discussions with permanent representatives extremely enriching and enlightening, full of creative ideas, best practices, and lessons learned. So I again shared the summaries of these discussions with member states and with you and all those people who are interested. The need for multilateralism is especially crucial for the largest ever global vaccine campaign. Vaccines must be available to everyone and accessible to all, fairly and equitably. So ensuring that requires political will. And that's why I launched my Vaccines for All initiative. COVID-19 will not be beaten one country at a time. And vaccines only work if a critical threshold of people are covered. It is therefore a moral and practical imperative that we cover all people with particular support for the poorest and most vulnerable. So these were what we did during the 4 months in office. I would now like to look ahead and share with you some of the planned meetings or programs we have. First, a joint thematic event on the least developed countries, which I will host together with the President ECOSOC, will take place. I'll also convene the high-level meeting on middle-income countries, which have been uniquely challenged by the pandemic, including because of structural issues related to debt and access to financing for development. 2021 is shaping up to be the year of the environment. For the first time ever, COP-level events on climate change, biodiversity, desertification, land degradation, and drought is taking place in the same year. So accordingly, in April, the General Assembly will host a high-level dialogue on desertification, land degradation, and drought. Land is the foundation of our societies, and productive land is a cornerstone to global food security, and a healthy environment. And yet this resource is under threat. And this event will give us a chance to assess progress made during the UN decade of deserts and the fight against desertification, and to map a path forward. Linked to land degradation is the need to protect our planet's water resources. And in that regard, I will convene a high-level meeting on water and sustainable development, which will take place in March. And the General Assembly has also mandated a high-level dialogue on energy at summit level in September. Currently, 789 million people still have no access to electricity, and 2.8 billion no access to clean cooking. And we need to turn the global COVID-19 crisis into an opportunity to build back better and accelerate energy transition. In terms of some other events, we will convene a thematic debate on digital technologies and connectivity on 27th of September, 27th of April. That will be an opportunity to address the digital divide, which has deepened inequality and hurt youth in particular. We will also have a high-level event in May on the contribution of culture to sustainable development. Given the creative economy's dynamism, I aim to highlight the potential of culture to accelerate SDG implementation as well as COVID-19 relief and recovery efforts. In June, we will hold a second special session, this time to discuss threats posed by corruption. And I think corruption erodes trust in institutions and undermines progress on all of the sustainable development goals. It's my hope that this 3 days special session will provide an opportunity to shape the global anti-corruption agenda for the next decade by advancing bold and innovative approaches. Also in June, we are planning to convene a high-level meeting on HIV/AIDS. The meeting and its political declaration will let us take stock of the efforts these past few decades and bolster our fight against AIDS epidemic and its impacts. You can also expect the high-level thematic debate on urban safety, security, and good governance, making crime prevention a priority for all. So that will be organized this year, together with the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. The 2030 Agenda recognizes the need to make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And this debate will look into how we can better prioritize safety and get rid of the vulnerabilities that are exploited by criminals. Last but not least, throughout our endeavors in the General Assembly, I will, of course, work with closely with the member states. But I also value inputs from and collaboration with other stakeholders, including the civil society. And in that regard, I plan to have a dialogue with civil society next month. Distinguished members of the press, dear friends, an important process ahead of us in this session is the selection and appointment of the Secretary General. As you are aware, we will soon launch this process officially, together with the President of the Security Council, through a joint letter. In 2015, the General Assembly adopted a landmark resolution that set out a new, transparent, open, and inclusive process to select and appoint the Secretary General. Secretary General Guterres has informed me and the President of the Security Council that he is available to serve a second term. There may or may not be other candidates, which is up to the member states. In any case, I'm committed to ensuring that the selection process remains guided by the principles of transparency and inclusivity. I will work closely with the President of the Security Council and ensure that all relevant General Assembly mandates are fully implemented. And I'm expecting the candidates or the candidate to come to the General Assembly with a vision statement and have an interactive dialogue meeting so that before going to the Security Council to get elected or selected, it will be good that they present their vision to the General Assembly and to the member countries. And I'll make sure that this will happen. Before answering your questions, I'd like to say that it has been an immense pleasure to serve the United Nations and its member states for the past 4 months. It has reinforced my firm belief in the value of multilateralism in overcoming the global challenges. I think the General Assembly is the world's premier political forum, where every UN member state has a voice. Last year, we marked the 75th anniversary of the organization, and amid the unprecedented challenges posed by the pandemic, I have been working to ensure the continued functioning of the General Assembly and the fulfillment of its mandates, so that the very real problems being faced by people across the globe can be discussed and addressed. We may not be able to physically gather and travel, as we did at this time last year. We may not be able to rely on the spontaneous in-person interactions that I think are so helpful for diplomacy. But I have seen the commitment of the member states and the United Nations system firsthand. I have seen that the debilitating sickness cannot stop the important work of this fundamental organization. I have been inspired, and that inspiration will continue to fuel my desire to serve the people who are counting on the United Nations. Thank you very much. I was testing your patience, and you have done well up to now. Thank you very much for that. I'm ready to your questions now.
Thank you so much, everyone. And the first question, as normal, goes to the UN Correspondents Association, ED Letter of AP.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, thank you for doing this press conference, and we hope we'll see you often in this room. I have a follow-up question to what you just said about the process of selecting the next Secretary General. And then I'll ask my question. My follow-up question is, you said that the joint letter from the General Assembly and the Security Council would be sent soon. How soon, and will there be a deadline in there for countries to submit candidates, and what will that deadline be? And my question is about the mob attack on the United States Capitol. I think we'd all like to hear your reaction personally and the implications for security and the safety of staff at United Nations headquarters. Thank you.
Concerning the Secretary General's selection and election, I have mentioned a part of it. Let me share with you what happened until now and what I think will happen in the coming days or months. First of all, I wrote a letter to the Secretary General asking if he's available for second term in office or not. And he replied to me, and also sent a letter to the President of the Security Council, saying that he's available for this. So, same day, it was on Monday, I talked to the President of the Security Council, the PR of Tunisia, and we had a meeting on Tuesday, and I shared with him a draft for the letter we're going to start the process together. He shared this letter with the members of the Security Council, and we are hoping that we will be able to sign this letter together before the end of the month. And then the process starts. And then what I'm planning to do is, as I mentioned previously, I would make sure that any candidate or the candidates comes to the General Assembly for an interactive dialogue meeting and to share their vision and explain what they're going to do during the 5 years term in office. And there will be a question and answer part. And it will give, I think, the power of the General Assembly to the Secretary General before getting elected and during his 5 years term. So when the election takes place in the Security Council, then of course it will come back to the General Assembly. On your question, if there is a deadline for announcing the candidature, I think we don't have legally the right to impose any dates. Any country can present a candidate even at before 1 month before January. It's legally possible. But politically, what I'm going to do is, as soon as we start the process, I will announce that the first wave of candidates, I will have them in the General Assembly. So once we have this with one or how many candidates there are, last time there were 11. All of them came to the General Assembly separately. And then at the last moment, there was another one, 1 month before the taking over in October, you very well know. So that's why I'm dividing into waves. First wave, I'm planning to do it sometime April, beginning of May. So if there are other candidates announced after my first wave of meetings in the General Assembly, then we will have a second wave. So important thing is they come to the General Assembly and also share their vision with the General Assembly and member countries. So concerning the storming of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, I think peaceful transition of power is a fundamental feature of democracy. And all the time I expressed sadness and concern over those troubling developments at the Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. I also, in that same statement, mentioned my belief that peace and respect for democratic processes would prevail in our host country. I think I should also mention here that I was heartened that the U.S. democratic process was able to proceed later. And that day, the Congress certified the election of President Joe Biden. I look forward to close cooperation between the General Assembly and the incoming U.S. administration. And I'm really very happy that President-elect Biden, in reply to my request to make a phone conversation, he sent a very important letter, at least on my behalf, which not only makes a good example for this relation to be established, but also, if you read it from another perspective, it also shows the new U.S. administration's strong will to cooperate with the United Nations, and perhaps we will have, in many cases, with the participation of the host country, we might have better solutions to problems, and we can have a new methodology in dealing with problems. Regarding the warnings of armed protests, I think the U.S. is one of the world's largest democracies, and I trust that the Americans will respect the outcome of the election.
Thank you. The next question goes to Philippe Ratet of AFP.
Thank you, President. Good morning, President. My question is, a big part of your job should be a trip abroad. Do you plan any trip, or do you plan any virtual trip, as we saw with Antonio Guterres in UK recently? And second question, how do you see the next General Assembly, I mean the high-level segment, in September? I know you would not be president anymore at this time, but you have to prepare it. Do you see it like last year, virtual, or have you any other idea? Thank you.
Of course, one part of this office is to travel to countries, to meet with people, show the UN flag, and listen to them and bring their messages back to the United Nations General Assembly. And I really miss this, because as a diplomat and as a politician for 10 years, I am the example of a person who benefited from these meetings and in-person human touches, if I may say so. But the existing circumstances has not allowed us to make any travels at all. But with my team, we are planning travels abroad. Of course, with the condition that things develop positively, that we will be able to make these visits. Of course, it would be nice for the President of the General Assembly to visit countries which has UN headquarters, like in Geneva or in Vienna or in Bangkok or in Kenya or elsewhere. So we're first planning to visit those places if possible. Second is, of course, there are great expectations from individual countries, because I think UN flag is more important to some countries than some other countries. That's what I learned from my discussion. Some countries said, perhaps you can live without the United Nations, but we can't. We fully depend on what the UN is. And even going there, visiting them, will increase the credibility of the United Nations and open way to new possibilities for the UN. And of course, we have something like 200,000 UN workers around the world. I have deep respect on them. They are sacrificing their lives. They are living in very difficult conditions. They are doing great job, which shows the UN flag in difficult areas. It would be nice also to visit them and share with them what they need and what we can give. And also, going there will increase the moral of them. So this is where we are. It depends on how the vaccine situation develops. It depends on, in the countries we travel, what will be the quarantine possibilities. Because, as I'm mentioning, I have 52 weeks altogether, and I can't lose 2 weeks in quarantine. My weeks are precious. It must be used efficiently. So I will also look to that, and I hope we will be able to make some visits when this COVID-19 pandemic permits and these difficulties I mentioned will allow. Concerning the September high-level week, it's very difficult to tell what will happen even next month. We're facing a situation where things change even in one day. So it will be too early to make any predictions for September. But as I have mentioned, my personal feeling is that we will have to continue like what we have now in hand. Perhaps it might ameliorate a little bit. We might have, for some high-level meetings, some high-level persons attending our meetings. But I don't think we can see a September week where 10,000 people is in the building, people are enjoying themselves, civil society, guests, presidents, prime ministers, wandering around with 10 people surrounding. I mean, I don't think we will be able to see that. But let's cross our fingers. Let's hope that it will come. But also we must be realistic.
So let's go to the screen really quickly for one question. We'll go to Maria Krenova of TASS.
Thank you, Brendan. Mr. President, actually, you already answered in quite a detail my question about SG election process. I just have a short follow-up. So when basically is the last day when General Assembly can approve the new candidacy of next Secretary General?
Well, the job starts in January next year. So from January backwards, first the Security Council has to make the election, and then the General Assembly makes the approval. So I can't give dates, but any time before January, this process must come to an end.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for this press conference. I'm sorry, Mr. President.
Objection,
sorry.
objection.
I apologize.
Secretary General is listening, so.
Sorry about that. My question will be on the vaccine. Betül Yürük, Turkish news agency, Anadolu. Have you had any discussions with the New York City officials about when the vaccine would be available for the for the UN officials and diplomats, particularly for those working in the field? And we have seen some leaders taking the vaccine in public to show that it is safe and efficient. When the vaccine is available for you, would you take it in public? Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me tell you what I have done for myself. I have an advantage of being older than 65 years old. So, so once the announcement came out, I went to the system and applied for an appointment, and I have gladly got the appointment for the 2nd of February and 4th of February for my wife. This is not because I'm the PGA, but I'm 65 years old, more than that. Then I'm happy that the system is working. And I know that the Secretary General has done the same, so he also applied to the system, and he got his appointment. I got from the New York State. He got it from the New York municipality. So in different days, we are testing the system, how it works. Having said this, I think the issue of COVID vaccine is very important, and it is indispensable to overcoming this virus. That's the only thing now we depend on, facing a horrible situation everywhere in the world, and getting our communities and economies back on track mostly depends on the success of this vaccine and the success of this vaccination procedures. And of course, from this perspective, getting the United Nations back on its feet to work and support the world recover is also important. So I know that vaccine distribution is a mammoth task, and priority is being given to risk groups. But of course, there is also a word used which is essential workers. UN personnel and the UN member delegations has been considered as essential workers from the beginning of this epidemic. And now what I think is UN personnel should continue to be considered as essential workers. Because first of all, the host country has a responsibility for the United Nations to keep United Nations working. It's not a problem of another state. It is the problem of New York State. Only New York State has the United Nations. In Kentucky or in California, it is not the case. But so it's not a big deal. We're talking about a few thousand of vaccines when there's 330 million population in the United States. So I'm kindly requesting the host country and the local authorities to think from this perspective, and in order to keep this work in the United Nations we are doing, and what we are doing is not easy, as I mentioned in my previous statement. We are taking risks. We are trying to show that UN is alive. We are trying to show that the United States is supporting the United Nations. And because of this, that UN could be support the world's difficult areas, can address the issues of vulnerable people and countries, etc., etc. So that is why I hope that in the coming days or weeks, we will be considered as the United Nations family in New York, as essential workers, and could have, at least for those people who are coming to the headquarters and attending our meetings, and for those people who are making this possible, to get a special treatment by the host country and the local authorities.
Thank you, sir. Let's go to the screen again really quickly. And journalists, if you can keep your questions short because we're running out of time. Let's go to Abdul Hamid from Al-Quds Al-Arabi.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Mr. President. My question is about UNRWA. As you know, that the GA passed Resolution 302 in 1949 to establish the UNRWA, and the resolution, in fact, was advanced by the U.S. itself. Now, UNRWA is facing a fatal destiny, if not rescue. Why the General Assembly does not move in that direction? Why you don't take an initiative to hold a special meeting on UNRWA and how to save this important organization? Thank you, Mr. President.
Can we have another question?
Sure. Abdul Hamid, it was difficult to hear you. We're gonna try to come back to you later. The sound connection was not so good. Let's go to the room really quickly. Go ahead, Toby Burns from NHK.
Thank you, Brendan, and thank you very much, Mr. President. My question is on the nuclear ban treaty, the TPNW, that's coming up, goes into legal force at the end of this month. You mentioned that the first resolution passed by by the General Assembly pertained to disarmament. So, what are your views about that? About the legality of this treaty on January 22nd? Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more question and then we'll come back. So let's go to Celia. Go ahead, Celia.
Mr. President, you talked about the selection and appointment of the next ASG. I would like to know, are you going to ask Mr. Guterres to talk not only about what he expects, his vision for the next 5 years, but what he did on his first term, whether it's about failures or success?
Okay. So, concerning the question on UNRWA, Uh, as we continue to mark the 75 years of the United Nations during this session, we would be remiss in not acknowledging the work of UNWA. And I think it's the longest standing UN agency, which is tied to the longest standing issue on the UN peace and security agenda. So despite widespread political and financial pressures, UNRWA continues to be a critical humanitarian actor and stabilizing entity in the Middle East, serving more than 5 million Palestinian refugees in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and the occupied Palestinian territory. So in Gaza alone, it provides emergency food aid to nearly 1 million of the most impoverished people. And that's half the population of Gaza. It has been instrumental in COVID-19 response, given its expertise in providing mobile health and educational services in conflict-ridden areas. So its quality social services, including health and education, serve to promote the SDGs and ensure that Palestinian refugees are not forgotten. And UNRWA is a priority for donors and the multilateral system, as evidenced by the overwhelming support for its mandate renewal during the 74th session. So it is in our collective interest and indeed our collective responsibility, pending a just and comprehensive settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to ensure that UNRWA continues its operations uninterrupted. I encourage member states in all my statements and in all the meetings we had in the General Assembly to support the agency, including through sustained and reliable contributions. Concerning the nuclear weapons issue and the NPT review conference you have mentioned, it is important to have an inclusive dialogue towards our 7-decade-long journey to seek a nuclear weapon-free world. And the NPT remains the cornerstone of the overall nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime. So on October 2020, the UN Treaty on Prohibition of the Nuclear Weapons reached the required ratification by 50 states parties. And the treaty will enter into force on 22nd of January this month. And I hope that the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons can serve as another instrument to safeguard and strengthen the international non-proliferation and disarmament architecture. Meanwhile, the 2021 review conference on the parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons is tentatively scheduled to meet from 2 to 27 August in New York. So because of COVID-19, the review conference was postponed from its original dates last year in April. And as this is a member states-driven process, my role is only to provide support to the chair and secretariat. So the third question was?
It was about the Secretary General, where you
Okay.
asked him what he did.
You're asking the difficult questions. Look, first of all, there's a already registered meeting of the Secretary General with the General Assembly on the 28th of this month. So he will make a statement there, explain what he has done, what he will do, and it is not because he's a candidate, but this is for the Secretary General to do in that part of the year. So we will have first here in that meeting part of the question you have asked. The second one, which I have mentioned, is the first wave with the candidates. Of course, it's a different one. It is as a candidate. So it might be different than what he will present us as the incumbent Secretary General on the 28th of this month. So I can't I can't tell to the Secretary General what his vision should be, what he has to say. Is he happy or not? I mean, it's his job to decide, and it's our job to listen and ask questions.
So we're running out of time. We're going to have 3 more questions. I have 3 more questions on my list. One on the screen, that's going to be Iftikhar, and then we're going to come to Dulcie and to Ephraim. So first we'll start with Iftikhar Ali of Associated Press of Pakistan. Go ahead, Iftikhar. And we'll take the questions all in a row, and then we'll do the answers.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Mr. President. During the past 4 months of your presidency, negotiations to reform the Security Council were held a couple of times. Sir, do you see any hint of progress towards this important goal to reform the Security Council? Because I see the positions of the parties are frozen as they were before. And do you need to give a push to these negotiations?
Thank you, Iftikhar. We'll just take the other questions first, and then the PJ will answer. Let's go to Dulcie from Pass Blue.
Thanks very much. Given that you're a gender champion, Mr. President, do you think the UN should have a woman leader as soon as possible? If Guterres gets a second term, it'll be more than 80 years without a woman leading the UN. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dulcie. And the final question will go to Ephraim.
Second question. I know you said that whether or not we're going to have candidates depends on the member states, but are you personally encouraging member states to come forward with their own candidates and really expand on the transparency beginnings that we saw in 2016?
Over to you, Mr. President.
Concerning the Security Council reform, of course, it's very important, not only for member states, but also to the United Nations as a whole. And of course, it's a very complex challenge that is closely linked to one of the main pillars of our organization, which is the peace and security. So there's no doubt that the membership of the Security Council, as well as its working methods, must reflect the realities of the 21st century. This process is an intergovernmental one, and thereby member states driven. So it's building on the meetings held during previous sessions. What I did in my 4 months was I had consultations with almost every group in the IGN process. I listened to their views, I exchanged views with them, and then I appointed 2 co-chairs for the IGN process, which is the PR of Qatar and PR of Poland. So they're going to start the intergovernmental negotiations for the 75th session on the 25th and 26th of January. The first meeting will take place. And of course, I believe that dialogue among member states is the most effective way to bring the reform process forward. But I'm looking forward also that the first IGN meeting, 25th and 26th of January, will also give some lights on what we will be able to do in the following months. We're planning to have more meetings of the IGN. We have reserved spaces in the General Assembly Hall for those. But first, I wanted to see what's happening on the 25th and 26th of January so that we can decide on further steps. So concerning the a woman Secretary General, of course, this is not in the hands of the President of the General Assembly or the Security Council. It's a member-driven process, and it will be realized only if there are women candidates. If there are women candidates, then they will be eligible in the process. So last time, when this process started, there were 11 candidates, as I mentioned, almost half of them were women. So I hope, I don't know. Sorry?
13 candidates, 700.
Okay, you see? So I mean, it's not in my hands to force any country to come out with candidates or a woman candidate or a man candidate. But I think as soon as we start the process, then we will wait for the decision of the countries, whether they will propose somebody, whether they will propose a woman, and then we can be able to understand where we are.
And for the final question, Efrem, can you repeat your question, please?
Whether you're being, Mr. President, proactive in encouraging countries to bring forward their candidates and.
In my, when this process starts, then I will also write a letter to member countries where I will say that I'm expecting the views and decision of the countries to come out with candidates or not. I mean, the different situation here is last time we didn't have an incumbent Secretary General. So when the process started, the letter went out saying that please come out with candidates. And also there was a sentence saying that preferably also include women candidates. This time it's a slightly different situation where we have an incumbent Secretary General who is a candidate. So that might make the picture look differently. I don't know. It doesn't, from my perspective, it doesn't affect anything. But I mean, what I was telling was, last time when we started the process, we didn't mention that the Secretary General, incumbent Secretary General, is also a candidate. This time, we have already announced that the incumbent Secretary General is a candidate. Other than that, rest is the same with the process we had last time. It doesn't make any difference. So, and I will make sure that it is a fair, inclusive process, very openly. You know that I'm a very open person. I share everything, either on the tweet or on the website. I not like hiding anything. Where even Brandon is opposing to me being so frank and open. But I mean,
that's not true.
So we will follow, and I'm sure in February the process starts, and then we will see what's going on.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We've been here for 1 hour, and the President was very happy to take all of your questions, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Well,
I'll let...
in politics, even 1 week is very long. So let us see things develop, and I'll be more than happy to see you anytime.